The Great Root, Alabasta. Mausoleum of Former Kings. This is the resting place of successive Alabasta kings, near the capital Albana. Except for specific sacrificial activities, no one will disturb this sacred and magnificent mausoleum. At this moment, the silence of the tomb of the late king was broken by a few rash people. It's a pirate. More precisely, the pirates who escaped here. Who? Captain, I can't do it anymore, I can't run anymore. Hurry up, do you want to be killed? The pirate captain pulled up his crew and looked behind him in horror. That man is actually in this country. The first officer was out of breath and said, "No, it's better to say, that man can catch us early in the morning, why did he force us here?" This is what the captain was curious about, but it was impossible for them to go any further. All around, the gravel surged, gradually condensing a figure. A tall man wearing a black fur coat with a horizontal scar on his face appeared in front of the pirates. His left hand is gone, replaced by a huge golden hook. That person is one of the 7 Waha under the king, the sand crocodile who originally offered a bounty of 81 million berries. The pirate captain saw the tomb of the late king behind him and had no way to escape, so he took the initiative to stand up. "Hey, sand crocodile, we surrender. If you want to send us to the navy, please do, but don't hurt my crew." Hearing this, Crocodile just smiled gloomily and lit a cigar for himself. Suddenly, the yellow sand surged, and a sharp gravel machete slashed through the chests of the pirates. When the Shasha fruit ability was activated, the water in the pirates was instantly swept away, and they fell to the ground on the verge of death. He, I'll leave you alone. After all, a national hero can't be too cruel. Crocodile walked past the pirates and murmured. "However, thanks to you running fast enough, I can use the pretext of chasing you to get close to this tomb that only the royal family of Alabasta can approach." His real purpose is for the shocking secret hidden behind the kingdom of Alabasta ancient weapon Pluto. Crocodile stretched out his right hand, and the rustling fruit erosion ability activated, eroding an inconspicuous crack in the outer wall of the tomb. Immediately, the body elements turned into a stream of yellow sand and drilled into it. Coming to the mausoleum, Crocodile turned on the flashlight, illuminating the surroundings. He saw a downward road, but was blocked by a stone gate. But this doesn't stop the natural devil fruit ability. Going forward along the road, Crocodile came to the underground of the tomb of the previous king, and his face darkened instantly. This is indeed a mausoleum of extraordinary specifications. Even if the light of the flashlight can only glimpse the tip of the iceberg, Crocodile has never seen such a magnificent place. However, the ancient script he expected did not appear here. "Tisk, aren't you here?" After thinking for a while, Crocodile shook his head and said, "Forget it, after all, I haven't found anyone who can translate ancient texts, at least it can be ruled out here." However, the moment Crocodile turned to leave, a strange aura suddenly locked on him. "Who?" Crocodile broke out in a cold sweat and turned around immediately, but saw nothing. Although it was daytime, but after all, it was underground in the cemetery, and there was still a feeling of being stared at. Was that Crocodile, and he felt uncomfortable all over. He looked around and found nothing, so he planned to go back the same way. But at this moment, there was a sudden rumbling sound all around, and the lights came on one after another, instantly drowning the faint light of the flashlight. Click! A cracking sound rang out. Click! 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 It was followed by increasingly dense cracking sounds. Crocodile looked up and found that there were already cracks on the wall not far away. Countless golden rays of light poured out from it, causing his eyes to sting slightly. Crocodile felt the growing energy in front of him, and couldn't help shrinking his pupils. Not good. He hurriedly elementalized his body, turning it into gravel and sticking to the ground. Immediately, the wall burst, and a suffocating breath spread throughout the mausoleum. Crocodile was even more shocked inside. Is that Overlord's arrogance? This is the depths of the mausoleum, and there is only one living person in Crocodile. But he has never heard of any dead person who can burst out with tyrannical arrogance. Vaguely, he saw a figure slowly stepping out from the golden light behind the wall. Who? Crocodile squinted his eyes, and when the golden light slowly faded, he finally saw the man clearly. It was a person wearing a golden yellow armor, with dark purple ribbons on the waist, neck, and wrists as decoration, and a helmet in the shape of a bird. The style is very similar to the traditional clothing of Alabasta, but there are certain differences. Crocodile continued to maintain his elemental state, observing each other. The person seemed a little dazed, looked around, and then suddenly locked his gaze on Crocodile. Did you see the color domineering? Crocodile felt his scalp numb instantly. He didn't know that there was a domineering monster who could use 2 or even 3 colors hidden under the tomb of the previous king in Alabasta. But the Crocodile one has his rules start first to be strong. Taking advantage of the moment when the man was puzzled, Crocodile quickly approached him, and immediately swung a gravel machete. Swish! Hit! The machete slashed, but Crocodile never expected anything to happen. The ability that was supposed to absorb all the water in the opponent's body was useless at the moment. Then, the person spoke up. The ability of Shasha fruit. His voice was hoarse, as if he had slept for a long time and his mouth was dry. No, I should be the one with the ability to rustle fruit. Suddenly, he noticed Crocodile's appearance, and his voice became very surprised. Are you Crocodile? Sand Crocodile. He, knowing what I said, it doesn't look like a ghost. Crocodile turned the golden hook in his left hand. Are you here to rob the tomb? The ability to dry up is useless. Are you a natural ability person? Swish! Crocodile waved a sandstorm and blew towards the man. The power of this move is enough to blow up a dune. Even if the opponent is a natural devil fruit person, this move is enough to force him to elementalize his body. But the odd man just stretched out his right hand. Wow! The sandstorm instantly dissipated and became invisible. Crocodile froze there. He was pretty sure that it was dissipated, not offset by some other attack. In the next instant, several figures suddenly appeared around Crocodile. Those are humanoid soldiers composed purely of yellow sand, each holding a gravel spear. Swish! Several spears pierced through Crocodile instantly, and he had no time to dodge, let alone defend. The man grinned and said, "All right, rustling fruit, that's how I use it." A few drops of cold sweat trickled down Crocodile's forehead. He was not sure whether the opponent would not use the domineering arrogance of the armed color, or do not want to use the domineering arrogance of the armed color. If it is the latter, then he has already died once. Crocodile took a half step back, and the current situation has far exceeded his expectations. Shasha fruit, mausoleum, Alabasta, one question after another cannot be answered. He looked at each other cautiously, and said tentatively, "Who are you?" "I." The man touched his chin and suddenly hooked his fingers. Those gravel soldiers instantly dissipated into a pile of yellow sand. Immediately afterwards, the surrounding of the mausoleum began to rumble, and the walls cracked, as if it had been given life, opening an exit for this closed mausoleum. The sun of Alabasta shone on the faces of the two of them. The man said slowly, "I'm Ryan Rowan. The first emperor of the Alabasta Empire, the former rustling fruit person." "Oh, right." The man paced, found his scepter shaped like a long spear, and pulled it out from the ground. He looked at the sun in the sky. "I seem to have died 800 years ago." Rowan, full name, Ryan Rowan, Traverser. At the beginning of time travel, it took Rowan a long time to finally be sure that he had come to the world of One Piece. But it's a little early. 685 years of the Haiwan calendar. He came to a time when the world government had not yet been established. The navy, pirates, 4 emperors, 5 old stars, none of these exist. In this era, only the countries at sea are fighting endlessly for world hegemony. In response, Rowan shrugged and stepped into this chaotic era. To live a new life, it's better to have a good time. During the adventure, Rowan ate the natural rustling fruit and tried to develop the fruit's ability. The power and usage of devil fruits depends largely on the ability and imagination of the person who has the ability. Rowan did not refer to the ability of the future sand crocodile, but developed a completely different method of use according to his own memory. Based on the ability of Desert Emperor Azire. Use the Thria collar domineering to condense the gravel into gravel soldiers who are not afraid of death. In this era of endless wars, Rowan manipulated the gravel soldiers and made a name for himself. By chance, Rowan met a young man named Nefertari. The two joined forces and successfully established a superpower in this chaotic world, the name of which is the Alabasta Empire. Rowan, the first emperor of the Alabasta Empire. Time flies, and the war between nations continues. 719 years of the Hywan calendar. In order to cover the evacuation of the civilians in Alabasta, Rowan went to the battlefield and summoned hundreds of thousands of gravel forbidden troops by himself, blocking the advance of the enemy army in the case of absolute disadvantage. The crazy enemy used explosives to detonate the volcano. In front of him, there is the gurgle of lava and the rain of fire falling from the sky. Behind them are the citizens of the Alabasta Empire. Rowan shrugged again and stepped forward, just like when he set out many years ago. The wall of the Forbidden Army, stand. At the last moment in Rowan's memory, the lava solidified and the volcano stopped its roar. But he was also unable to look back at his own people. Rowan doesn't remember what happened after that. Probably died of exhaustion? It doesn't matter. But, what a happy life! Rowan doesn't care what impact his actions will have on future generations. After all, he is not a guardian of history. Whether the world government or the era of the great pirates, it will all come later. After his death, who cares about the flood? Water, really flooded. Rowan woke up from a groggy state and seemed to break free from some kind of shackles. When he finally regained consciousness, he saw a person he could never have imagined. Sand crocodile. This man, who should have been a few generations behind him, is standing there right now. The gravel machete swung past. Crocodile attacked. Crocodile's attack is ineffective. Rowan did the math, about 800 years have passed. He was a little surprised. If he was still alive, where did Crocodile's rustling fruit come from? So Rowan tried it, and although he was a little unfamiliar, he still managed to summon the gravel soldiers. Weird. Rowan looked at his hand, too many questions filled his heart. But problems can always be solved bit by bit. Rowan eagerly wanted to take a look at this era that he was familiar with in his memory but never really experienced. A new era after 800 years. Rowan's eyes flashed. For Crocodile on the side, it was a weird light. A man whose surname was not Nefertari, but who claimed to be the Emperor of Alabasta, a person who claims to be a shasha fruit person, a man who claimed to have died 800 years ago, weird. In addition to this, Crocodile could not find another way to describe it. But as smart as he was, he quickly found the loophole in the other party's words. Stop joking, you liar. Crocodile frowned and said, you said you died 800 years ago, and even if you could be resurrected, how could you possibly know my name? Rowan then remembered that he seemed to subconsciously called Crocodile's real name just now. But this little mistake was easy for Rowan to solve. He replied, maybe it's the induction between the same devil fruit person. Crocodile was speechless for a moment. He couldn't refute it. After all, the other party did possess the ability of rustling fruit, even if the method of using this ability was completely different from his own. But the problem came again. The same devil fruit can only reappear on the sea when the person with the power dies. He has already eaten the shasha fruit, why is this man named Rowan still alive? The noise of the outside world interrupted Crocodile's thoughts. Rowan opened the tomb too loudly, which naturally attracted the attention of the king of Alabasta. They were originally in the vicinity to clear up the rebels, and now they are under the leadership of King Cobra, and they came to the tomb of the previous king to investigate. Among the entourage, there are two patron saints of Alabasta, those with animal-type devil fruit abilities, Bell the Falcon and Jaka the Jackal. At the same time, there is also the only daughter of King Cobra, the little princess of Alabasta Nefertali Vivi. Everyone came to the tomb of the previous king and saw a scene that made them unbelievable. At this moment, a huge hole was opened in the huge and magnificent mausoleum. Countless gravels held up the large and small stones, making them suspended in midair, and also opened up a road leading directly to the mausoleum. Two figures are at the end of the road. One is the national hero they are all too familiar with, Sand Crocodile Crocodile. The other was a stranger they had never met. That is. Cobra narrowed his eyes. He was the only one present who was somewhat familiar with that person's clothing. That is the oldest style of armor in Alabasta that only exists in the records. Cobra thought that this kind of thing had long been lost in the long river of history, but he didn't expect to see it here. Tomb robber? No, no tomb robber would wear the stolen items perfectly, right? That outfit was like it was tailor-made for that man. Cobra thought about it for a while. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com ignored Bell and Gaka's obstruction, stepped forward, and solemnly asked, "Who are you?" Rowan didn't answer. He stared at Cobra, then turned to Vivi not far away. His heart trembled slightly. It's a familiar feeling. In fact, Rowan has no descendants, but that feeling is not from blood. That feeling originates from Alabasta itself, connecting them in destiny. Rowan took a step, walked past Cobra's side, and rubbed Weiwei's little head. Weiwei raised her head and seemed to feel something. Rowan walked up the stairs made of gravel and came to the ground. Surrounded by unfamiliar and familiar deserts. In the distance, there is a small oasis. A group of chaotic pirates retreated to the oasis heights, fighting for the final beast trapped. Cobra was about to lead someone to help, but was stopped by Rowan waving. Rowan squatted down, grabbed a handful of yellow sand, and stood up slowly. The grit slipped from his fingertips and dispersed with the wind. Swish! Rowan suddenly clenched his fingers, and the gravel around him began to respond to his call. Whoa, whoa! Figures of gravel soldiers stood up from the yellow sand. Vaguely, the people around seemed to feel the wind from the cruel battlefield 800 years ago. The gravel soldiers are holding long spears, standing on the yellow sand, ready to fight. Rowan looked into the distance, his voice was long, and there was an inexplicable ancient feeling. He said slowly, "Alabasta, your emperor, is back. Alabasta, your emperor, is back." The calm and ancient voice fell into the ears of the people around, and a stone stirred up 1,000 waves. The yellow sand dissipated, and the 5 gravel soldiers stayed by Rowan's side. When the king's army saw this, they held weapons and protected their king and the little princess. The 2 adjutants of the Kingdom Guard, Bell and Gaka, are ready to activate the Devil Fruit ability at any time and enter a state of battle. However, Cobra, the king, stepped out of the crowd again and asked solemnly again, "Who are you?" Rowan turned his head and replied slowly, "I'm Ryan Rowan." When the voice fell, the king's army did not react, but the pupils of Cobra and Vivi suddenly shrank. Ryan Rowan? As members of the Nefertari family, they are all too familiar with this name. When they were children, they all read the history of the Nefertari family. Among them, the name Ryan Rowan is tied with the founder of the Nefertari family, Nefertari. The two are close friends and even brothers. The latter was the founding king of the Kingdom of Alabasta. The former is the only emperor of the Alabasta Empire. The figure of the man in front of him gradually overlapped with the portrait in the history book. Whether it's the outfit or the appearance, it's the same as in the records. Are you an ancestor? Cobra couldn't believe it, but the sense of fate made him unable to doubt it. Hearing the words, Rowan thought for a while, and suddenly smiled. If my marriage with Nefertari is counted, you are indeed my descendants. Wow! Vivi, who was beside her, suddenly became excited. After all, he is only a 6-year-old child, and his concerns are different from ordinary people. If you're the same generation as the first-generation patriarch, don't I want to call you Mrs. Wife? Grandpa. Rowan. After thinking about it, he corrected, actually, just call me Ancestor. Cobra nodded and said solemnly, Master Ancestor. Rowan. When he tried his best to die, he was younger than Cobra, so he was not used to being called Ancestor by such an uncle whose daughter was 6 years old. After thinking about it, Rowan changed the subject. What age is it now? Cobra replied, the year is 1507 on the Haiwan calendar. Crocodile let Rowan know that he was in 800 years, and Cobra's answer let Rowan know the exact time. It was a good time. Rowan grinned. Many major events that have influenced later generations are still in their infancy, and Rowan has enough time to adapt to this place and enough opportunities to taste them one by one. But first, Rowan raised the spear in his hand, which was also a scepter that represented the identity of the former emperor of the Alabasta Empire. The point of the spear pointed to the oasis highland where the king's army and the pirates were at a standoff. The territory of Alabasta is not a place where pirates can be reckless. Rowan's voice was calm, but it gave people an unquestionable feeling. Gaka and Bell, the two vice-captains of the king's army's escort, although still doubtful, King Cobra's actions have shown his attitude. The man in front of him is the founding emperor of the Alabasta Empire, Ryan Rowan. Known as the patron saints of Alabasta, they naturally did not want to embarrass the current king who they are loyal to in front of his ancestors, so they immediately bowed and said, "We will arrest you immediately." No need. Rowan shook his head and moved his shoulders slightly. I've been sleeping for 800 years, I always do some exercise, otherwise I'll be suffocated. Do it yourself? Hearing this, everyone's eyes couldn't help but turn to the gravel soldiers beside Rowan. He should be a capable person, right? What kind of attitude will the former emperor of the empire fight with? Rowan walked towards the oasis, the gravel soldiers followed closely, and the king's army, Cobra, and others followed behind him. What Rowan did not expect was that Crocodile actually approached him. Don't get me wrong, I'm just curious about the sudden resurrection of the dead 800 years ago. Crocodile was smoking a cigar, his smile slightly gloomy. Rowan was also laughing in a low voice, "Little Crocodile, your desire is too obvious." Little Crocodile. Crocodile was obviously very unhappy with the title. Rowan continued, "You don't care how I live, you just want to try the upper limit of my strength, and then adjust your next plan." Crocodile's pupils shrank, he didn't answer, his heart trembled. Could the person in front of you really be an old monster resurrected from 800 years ago? In any case, this man named Ryan Rowan's mind is far superior to Cobra and others. But even so, there is still work to be done on the surface. Crocodile immediately smiled and said, "What's the plan? I am the king of the 7 Wohe who has been recognized by the world government. I have been stationed in this country for a while and have protected many people." In the back, Vivi said loudly, "Yes, the newspapers say that Mr. Sand Crocodile is the hero of our country." Rowan smiled and nodded. He didn't say anything more, and didn't pay attention to Crocodile's thoughtful gaze. The group came to an oasis not far away. Here, the pirates are holding the high ground, facing off against the king's army. Seeing Cobra's return, the army commander in charge of this place seemed a little confused. "Your Majesty, the pirates have a caravan as a hostage, we dare not attack." Cobra was about to answer when another voice spoke. "It's okay." It was Rowan who spoke. Leaning on his scepter, he stepped forward and gently moved his fingers, and the group of gravel soldiers temporarily dissipated on the spot, turning into a few beaches of yellow sand. Under the surprised eyes of the soldiers, he walked to the ground by himself and looked at the leader of the pirates. The pirate leader was stared at by this strange man who suddenly appeared, and felt uncomfortable all over. He first asked his men to line up the defense to ensure that they could not be quickly attacked, and then shouted, "Don't come here again. Prepare ships and supplies for us to go to sea. When we leave the waters of Alabasta, we will naturally release people." A very simple kidnapper's appeal. But Rowan didn't answer him. The scepter shaped like a spear waved out, and Rowan roared, "Soldiers, attack!" The king's army looked at each other in dismay. "He is calling us?" "Obviously not." Before Rowan's voice fell, the 4 gravel soldiers gathered and formed again. With long spears in their hands, they charged upwards from below the heights at an astonishing speed. The unity of its movements is perfect. Swish! In just a split second, the seemingly solid line of defense of the pirates was washed away, and the spear point made of sand and gravel pierced through the shields of the pirates and smashed their array. In the panic, the pirate leader came near the kidnapped businessman and swung his sword to slash. Suddenly, the 5th gravel soldier rushed out from the side, the tip of the spear pierced the pirate leader's hand, and then swept away. "Wow!" The pirate leader screamed, was shot and flew out, and was captured alive by the king's army swarming up. Cobra wanted to block Vivi's eyes, but the expected scene didn't appear, so she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He understood that Rowan was taking care of Wai. Wai couldn't help but sigh, "Master Ancestor, it's amazing. That's not the level of powerful anymore." Crocodile was beside Cobra, his brows furrowed, and there were even a few drops of sweat on his forehead. As a shasha fruit person, he can feel more things than others. The ability of the natural devil fruit is the most difficult to control. I have never heard of anyone who can master elementalization to such a delicate level. Manipulate elements into human figures? Simply incredible. Crocodile became more and more vigilant in his heart. Rowan, no matter whether this man was the founding emperor 800 years ago, he is overwhelmingly powerful. That is a terrifying power that should never appear in the front section of the Great Route. After dealing with the pirates, Rowan asked curiously, "This is inland, why are there pirates?" "They are not pirates, strictly speaking, they are chaotic troops." Cobra reluctantly said, "They failed in the coup d'état and were driven out by neighboring countries. At the end of the road, they took the opportunity to sneak into Alabasta and occupied an oasis station called Santana. It's easy to defend and hard to attack. We can only besiege it, and then weed out the fish that slip through the net." "Master Ancestor." Cobra paused and said solemnly, "I'm sorry." In the end, Cobra thought it was all his fault. But Rowan shook his head. After all, the times have changed, and the era when the nations competed for hegemony has passed. Today, the Kingdom of Alabasta has a standing army of 600,000 people, but in the final analysis it is still a country dominated by commercial trade. The king of is easy to pass, but little devils are hard to guard against. With such a vast coastline, it is really difficult to defend against a group of chaotic troops that are at the end of their lives. But it's not hard to kill them. Bell has already investigated, and there are no civilians there. Cobra explained, but a strong attack will cause a lot of casualties. They are just a group of rabble. They only need to be besieged for a few more days, and they will naturally surrender. Rowan nodded and said in approval, "Very stable tactics, the style of that guy from Nefertari." Then, the conversation changed, "But, it's not my style." In just a split second, Rowan's words reminded Cobra of the man recorded in the history books. It was a time when the countries at sea were fighting for hegemony, an immortal legend bearing the name of the Alabasta Empire. Wow! Gravel, rubbed on the ground, and then began to float with Rowan's thoughts. One gravel soldier after another, stood up from the ground. They lined up neatly, with solemn expressions, filled with an invisible pressure. As the number of gravel soldiers increases, this oppressive force becomes stronger and suffocating. Gradually, the number of gravel soldiers became more and more exaggerated, far beyond the imagination of Cobra and the king's army. The last soldier stood up and stood still. Their formation was unusually neat, so it was easy to determine their approximate number: 10,000 people. It was an army of 10,000 people composed purely of gravel soldiers. Hey, hey! In the desert, only the whirring of the wind could be heard, mixed with the sound of a few king's troops swallowing their saliva. Many people are asking themselves, are they capable of defending against such an army? The answer is, no. Such an army is even enough to run rampant in Alabasta. Looking at the scene in front of him, Crocodile's face stiffened for a moment, but then calmed down again. Cobra recalled several comments about Rowan in the history books. Among them, the most concise, only 4 words: one man becomes an army. I moved my muscles and bones a bit, and it really feels very comfortable. Looking at Wai Wei, whose mouth was wide open, Luo Wen rubbed her head and couldn't help laughing. There is a feeling of an elder looking at his granddaughter. After that, he regained his calm expression, waved his scepter, pointed in the direction of Shantana Oasis Station, and shouted, "Soldiers, move forward! Deserts are dangerous, especially the deserted deserts of Alabasta. During the day, not only the scorching sun and high temperature are waiting for pedestrians, but also the beasts hiding under the gravel. Even the king's army, if you want to advance in the desert, you have to work hard. A little carelessness will pay a heavy price." In order to stabilize the siege situation of the Oasis Station Santana as soon as possible, King Cobra chose to lead the king's army across the desert. This was supposed to be a dangerous journey, but it was changed by an unexpected person. In the endless desert, an army is advancing mightily. The composition of this army is very special. On the periphery, is a defensive array composed of 10,000 gravel soldiers. In the inner circle, there were more than 1,000 soldiers of the king who should have been waiting in battle. Due to the presence of the gravel soldiers, the king's army was rarely relaxed. Those gravel soldiers exuded an inexplicable aura, which made the surrounding beasts calm down quite a bit, daring not to act rashly. This is also the reason why Rowan summoned the gravel soldiers in advance. In the king's army, Bell and Gecko lead the way, with Rowan, Cobra, Vivi, and Crocodile behind. Like the king's army, they all marched on foot. Cobra and Vivi are willing to share wheel and woe with the king's army. And Rowan and Crocodile, who are rustling fruit people, are more comfortable walking in the desert. As for why Crocodile was able to walk by the royal family's side, Cobra didn't care much about red tape, and Crocodile was a hero in this country, so naturally he acquiesced. Feeling the breath of the gravel soldier, Crocodile frowned. It is the domineering look of a king. Massive, special, and outrageously detailed domineering. While deterring the surrounding beasts, it will not cause large-scale killings. The beasts lowered their heads one after another, not so much fear, but surrender. After the army passed, the beasts could recover immediately and continue their lives. There is such a monster hidden in Alabasta. Crocodile murmured, his eyes moving slightly. Rowan noticed Crocodile's gaze, but didn't care. At the moment, he is talking to Cobra, learning about what happened after his death. Rowan was killed in 719 CE, and the world government was established by 20 kings in 720 CE. In other words, he fell on the eve of the establishment of the world government. After his death, because he had no relationship with his descendants, according to Rowan's personal arrangement, his close friend Nefertali took over the Alabasta Empire. However, without Rowan, the strength of the Alabasta Empire can only be regarded as the first line of countries, not the top. In the same year, due to the pressure exerted by the other 19 nations, Nefertari was forced to change the empire into a kingdom and participate in the establishment of the world government. However, he refused the opportunity to settle in the Holy Land Mary Joa and become a heavenly dragon, and chose to stay in Alabasta. After that, Nefertari took her own name as her surname and established the Nefertari family that has been passed down to this day. Nefertali Cobra, the 12th king of Alabasta. After listening to Cobra's story, Rowan's performance was unexpected. Cobra originally thought that the emperor of the empire 800 years ago would be furious, thinking that Nefertari wasted the foundation he laid down, but Rowan obviously didn't think so. He couldn't help clapping his hands and laughed. Sure enough, it's Nefertari's style. Cobra was taken aback. Master Ancestor, are you not angry? Angry? Why are you angry? Rowan stretched out his hand. The gravel rose from the ground, as if it had life, flowing slowly at his fingertips. It's a difference of ideas, and it has nothing to do with right or wrong. My idea created the former Alabasta Empire, and Nefertali's idea made the Alabasta Kingdom continue to this day. Rowan pinched a grain of sand with his fingertips and looked into the distance. I can feel that although there are many difficulties, this is indeed a very good country, and you have done a great job. Cobra smiled and nodded with a very relieved expression. On the other hand, Weiwei on the side seemed a little unconvinced. Of course, my father is a very powerful king. Hearing this, Luo Wen smiled, picked Weiwei up, supported her with one hand, and let her sit on his shoulder. Rowan's height is slightly higher than Crocodile, about 2.8 meters, so Weiwei can see quite good scenery. Her eyes crossed the dunes and pointed ahead. Master Ancestor, I can see Shantana. Everyone came to the top of the hill and looked down at the oasis station occupied by the rebel army. The centurion of the king's army, who was in charge of the garrison, came to report. Cobra waved his hand and ordered, all troops prepare for war. But Rowan reached out his hand to stop him. No need, let the king's army lift the defense, and leave the rest to me. The centurion who just arrived didn't know this strangely dressed man, so he couldn't help but find it funny. This gentleman, there are thousands of people in the chaotic army. Even Mr. Sand Crocodile can't guarantee that he won't let a fish slip through the net, right? Once a small group of chaotic troops escaped and entered other cities, civilian casualties would inevitably be caused, which was one of the reasons why the king's army did not choose to attack by force. But Rowan shook his head. I'm not alone. He held Vivi on his shoulder with one hand, and raised his scepter with the other, pointing at Shantana. Under the astonished gaze of the centurion, an army of 10,000 gravel soldiers marched forward from behind the dunes. Click! 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 Gravel collided with gravel, forming footsteps. Their movements were uniform to the extreme, and they approached Shantana little by little. Rowan smiled lightly and asked the little princess on his shoulder, Vivi, do you know which direction the capital of Alabasta is? No. Vivi nodded, pointed her finger forward, and past Shantana, it's over there. The capital of Alabasta, Albina. There is a palace with a long history, built as early as 4,000 years ago. There are countless secrets about this palace. Rowan also lived there for a long time. I miss it a bit, I want to go back and have a look. Rowan sighed inexplicably and turned his attention to Shantana. There, the rebels are panicking at the sudden appearance of an army of gritty soldiers. With the scepter and pestle on the ground, the marching speed of the gravel soldiers further accelerated. Until charge. So, you guys. Rowan raised his head, swung his scepter horizontally, and the gravel roared. The unmistakable voice echoed in everyone's ears, don't stand in front of the emperor. The chaotic army who occupied the oasis station had already begun to panic at this moment. They didn't know what happened. They only saw the king's army withdraw, and then the gravel soldiers suddenly appeared and charged Shantana. After a brief panic, they reluctantly regrouped. The rebels chose to occupy this place for a reason. As an oasis station, Shantana is the main traffic artery of Alabastus domestic trade routes. Sufficient supplies, and the terrain is easy to defend and difficult to attack. The king's army did not dare to destroy this inn, and this gave them enough leverage to negotiate. They wanted King Cobra to support their great revolutionary cause, or at the very least, Alabasta to shelter them from their neighbors. Those who failed to launch the rebellion could no longer consider the success rate of the plan, and could only be a living horse doctor. But now, a strange army suddenly appeared and charged them. "Shoot, shoot!" The leader of the chaotic army hurriedly commanded. The musket team stepped forward, occupied the only traffic lane, and then pulled the trigger. Boom! 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 The lead bullet shot out and hit the gravel soldiers who were charging in front, but the bullet directly penetrated their bodies. Nature. The leader of the chaotic army has some knowledge, so it is even more unbelievable. He knew that the Shishibukai sand crocodile might be in this country, but he had never heard that the sand crocodile could summon these thousands of gravel army. The gravel spear pierced the shield, and the first line of defense collapsed instantly. The leader of the chaotic army looked at the group of gravel soldiers desperately, and fell to his knees, his mouth opened and closed. What the is this? On the sand dunes. Crocodile looked down at the battlefield and narrowed his eyes. In his eyes, the gravel soldiers are being manipulated by Rowan, attacking the front of the Chaos Army from different directions. Of course, ordinary people can't compete with those with natural devil fruit abilities. Soon, the gravel soldiers on the front line broke through the formation of the chaotic army. The gravel spear swung and pierced through any enemy who dared to stand in front of them, and the battlefield fell into a one-sided situation. That is an almost exquisite battlefield control ability. Crocodile suddenly had a feeling. He felt Rowan's gaze overlooking the battlefield. Reading www.uuganshu.com is a lot like a chess player. The battlefield is his chessboard. As the observation continued, a cold smile suddenly appeared on Crocodile's face. He murmured, "He, is that so? It seems that I need to find a chance to confirm." About 10 minutes later, this unsuspenseful siege was over. The rebel army was defeated. Rowan had no idea of fighting a war of annihilation, but the chaotic army still suffered countless casualties. Cobra ordered the king's army to go to clean up the battlefield. Afterwards, Bell of the Falcon, who was in charge of the investigation, the animal-type bird fruit and falcon form ability, returned from the sky and changed from an animalized state back to a human form. He brought bad news. "Your Majesty, a small group of chaotic troops found the breach and fled to the southeast." Cobra was just about to arrange a chase, but Rowan suddenly smiled and said, "I'll go after it." He put way back on the ground, and the surrounding gravel surged. After a few breaths, Luo Wenhua made a sandstorm, and the figure disappeared in place. Wei clapped her hands excitedly. "Master Ancestor is amazing." But Cobra, the king, frowned slightly. He is very kind to the people, but he is also a ruthless character who can wrestle with other kings at the World Conference. Naturally, he can hear the overtones of Rowan's words. Rowan was going to deal with some things, so he let a small chaotic army go as an excuse. Then, what is the ancestor going to do? Cobra turned around and couldn't help but be stunned. Because one person also disappeared, one of the 7 seas under the king, sand crocodile. Oasis Station Shantana, southeast. This is an uninhabited desert. About a dozen people of the chaotic army who had just been let loose on purpose by Rowan had all fallen to the ground at this moment, not knowing whether they were alive or dead. There are 2 states of them. First, all the water in the body has been sucked dry, and it looks like a mummified corpse. Second, the gravel spear pierced through the body, and either died on the spot, or lost too much blood and was unable to get up. The 2 who caused such a situation were standing not far from the chaotic army, facing each other. The hot wind in the desert blew the purple ribbon and the black coat. Crocodile took a cigar, raised his eyebrows, and joked, "What a kind king, very Alabastus style." Rowan smiled, "Why do you say that?" "Hey, those guys are rebels, they have violated your country's territory." Crocodile shrugged and joked, "If I were you, I wouldn't poke them into a hornet's nest, but I wouldn't stop." However, Rowan's answer was beyond Crocodile's expectations. "Really? So someone didn't die?" Hearing this, Crocodile was stunned for a moment. "You don't know?" Rowan shook his head and corrected, "It's don't care." Crocodile frowned slightly. Rowan continued, "I only care about the direction and the opponents on the way. As for them, they are not qualified to be my opponents, so I don't care." Hearing Rowan's words, Crocodile laughed suddenly, his shoulders shaking. "Ha ha ha, as expected of an old monster from 800 years ago, it's so conceited that it makes people uncomfortable." "So?" Crocodile lit some cigar ashes and looked up at Rowan, "Why did you lead me out alone?" Cobra could see Rowan's thoughts, and Crocodile also guessed Rowan's purpose. The reason why he let loose a small group of rebels was to create time alone with the sand crocodile. Rowan was not surprised. After all, Crocodile was a person who was very good at intrigues. It would be best to get straight to the point when contacting such a person. "You brought the chaotic army into the territory?" Rowan's question was simple and straightforward, and Crocodile answered it neatly. "Yes." He nodded, stroked the golden hook on his left hand, and asked, "Then Mr. King, 800 years ago, guess why I did this?" Rowan thought for a while and replied, "You want to test the power of this country so that you can plan your next plan." "As for your real purpose," Rowan grinned, "Neferutali once told me back then that he was tinkering with some very complicated things, like what they were called." His next words made Crocodile's pupils shrink. "Ancient weapon Pluto. As soon as these words came out, Crocodile's face suddenly sank, and a sinister smile slowly emerged. "It seems that my investigation is in the right direction. That's why, Mr. King, who is too smart, I can only ask you, who was just resurrected, to die again." Rowan was a little surprised. "Hey, are you going to do something with me here? How will you explain it to Cobra and the others?" Crocodile smiled and said, "An old king who felt the danger of the nation and disappeared again after his appearance, and an old monster who had been dead for 800 years, but was resurrected again. You are the second kind, but you can also be the first." "A sort of." Rowan thought for a while, and it seemed that there was some truth to it. After all, he was able to reopen his eyes after 800 years, which was something he never thought of. What an impulsive crocodile! Rowan hooked his fingers, the gravel surged, and a gravel soldier stood up from the ground. "What are you going to do with my soldiers?" Crocodile grinned suddenly, with a ferocious smile on his face. "Don't bluff me, you paper tiger." Immediately, a sandbag suddenly gathered from his right palm. Swish! He swung his right hand vigorously, and the violent sandstorm tornado went straight to the gravel soldier. Boom! The gravel soldiers were instantly shattered and scattered into countless yellow sand. Crocodile shouted, "What if there are 10,000 such things that deal with trash fish? On this sea, personal strength is absolute." Rowan didn't answer, but raised his left hand and summoned more gravel soldiers. Holding spears in their hands, they charged towards Crocodile. Crocodile let out a low growl, twisted his body, and a huge gravel machete came out of him. Desert sword. Swish! The blade slashed and cut off all the surrounding gravel soldiers. One of the gravel soldiers with only the upper body left was struggling, and Crocodile stomped his head on, and then slammed hard. Boom! The gravel soldier's head was crushed, and his body instantly became invisible. This kind of toy might have worked 800 years ago, but it doesn't work anymore, old antique. Crocodile suddenly leaned down and stepped forward. Ode. In the desert, the speed of the sand fruit person can reach astonishing levels. In a split second, Crocodile was close to Rowan's body. The protective cover on the gold hook on his left hand was taken off, and the sharp hook pressed against Rowan's neck. Above it, the dark purple liquid slowly descended, corroding the gravel on the ground to form a small pit. That's venom. As a shasha fruit person, Crocodile knows his own weaknesses. As long as the ability user is stained with liquid, that part will temporarily lose the ability of elementalization, and can be hit by physical attacks. Now, Crocodile's venom-stained hook has resisted Rowan's vitals. He said with a gloomy smile, "You may be good at marching and fighting, but your body should be too weak, or you won't be able to create so many gravel soldiers to protect you. Now that you're going to die again, how do you feel?" Rowan thought for a while and suddenly asked, "Don't you want to know about Pluto?" Crocodile was overjoyed. He didn't immediately kill the killer, that's all. 800 years ago, the old monster who single-handedly created the Alabasta Empire, an old guy from the same period as the first generation of Tianlong people, such a person must know something. Crocodile nodded, "Yes, you say." Rowan shrugged and looked apologetic. "Well, Nefertari should be very clear about this, why don't you try and see if you can revive him too?" Crocodile. She was stunned for a few seconds. Sand Crocodile, angry. With his left hand, he was ready to kill this fiery old monster. But at this moment, Rowan suddenly said, "Little Crocodile, you actually said 3 things wrong." Crocodile was stunned for a moment, but suddenly a grain of sand floated in front of him. What is so special about a grain of sand?" "Very special. Because it is a black sand." There, Crocodile felt a force he was all too familiar with. Armed and domineering. In the next second, a feeling of extreme danger flooded into Crocodile's heart. He immediately raised the golden hook to block. In an instant, a black spear flashed by. Ding! The crisp metal collision sounded, and Crocodile's expression suddenly turned into a grin. Numb. With just one collision, his left arm was almost completely numb. The strength is so great. Crocodile took a few steps back before finally stabilizing his body. Rowan's voice came. "The first thing, I am the Emperor, not the King." Crocodile looked up again, and saw that the scepter in Rowan's hand had been covered by the dark-armed color domineering. The scepter that looked like a long spear had now become a scepter. A genuine armed-colored spear. "Hey, hey! The wind in the desert is blowing." Countless gravels surged beside Rowan. For those with the ability to rust fruit, this is not difficult to do. But what really surprised Crocodile was that there was a part of black gravel mixed in the sand. Those are all sand wrapped in armed domineering. The second thing, Rowan held the spear in his hand, and after turning the barrel of the gun with his backhand, the tip of the spear pointed down obliquely, and walked slowly forward in the surging gravel. With every step, it seemed as if a thin curtain of gravel had been torn apart. In that era of hegemony and melee, whether it's a battle between individuals or a war between countries, it's far more cruel than you think. "So, I'm very good at fighting." Shoo, shoo. The surging speed of the black gravel gradually increased, and 4 black sandstorms converged behind Rowan. 4 figures gradually formed in the sandstorm. The sound of metal colliding and rubbing could be vaguely heard. Crisp and nice. Rowan took a step, walked through the floating gravel, and came to Crocodile. Behind him are 4 soldiers whose bodies and spears are completely dark. They are like the most loyal guards, guarding around Rowan. Rowan looked at Crocodile and said slowly, "The third thing. It is not the soldiers who protect the Emperor, but the Forbidden Army. Armed color domineering, full coverage. Gravel Prohibition Army." At this moment, in a desert without people, what Crocodile faced was a scene that shocked him. The yellow sand filled the sky, and the black gravel was mixed in it and gathered together. They are like black ribbons, looming, surrounding Rowan, connecting him and the other 4 gravel soldiers. Massive armed arrogance surged in the gravel, dyeing the bodies of those soldiers pitch black. Also dyed black is the scepter in Rowan's hand. Rowan held it with his backhand, swung it horizontally like a long spear, and tore apart a sand curtain. Step out. The black color gradually spread, and Rowan's armor and body were also covered by the domineering aura of armament. Devil fruit is an extremely rare existence, even more so in nature. Only when a person with the ability dies, can a devil fruit with the same ability appear on the sea. And the world is really too big. An able person may not be able to investigate the clues of the former ability person after a lifetime. Crocodile didn't even expect that one day he would be able to fight against the former swish fruit ability. He recalled what Rowan once said in the mausoleum, "Sasha fruit, that's what I use." How to use? Condensing the gravel into soldiers, and then relying on the massive armed domineering, create an indestructible gravel forbidden army. Full-body armored domineering coverage really rare, but not scary, many masters can do this. What really made Crocodile's pupils shrunk, and the tremor in his heart could not be concealed, was that while Rowan was covered with domineering armament, he actually had enough power to cover the other 4 gravel soldiers. What a massive amount of armed arrogance! Facing such a vision, Crocodile had a sullen face and laughed out loud. Ha ha ha, as expected of an old monster from 800 years ago. He bent down, and the sandstorm gathered on his right hand, ready to fight. He is Sand Crocodile Crocodile. When he was a teenager, he became famous in the sea for breaking bamboo. He fought with the Devil's descendant Douglas Barrett several times. He also challenged the world's strongest man Whitebeard Edward Newgate. Now, it's just another emperor who existed in the world 800 years ago. It is definitely not his style to be timid before fighting. Hey! Hot air blows. Swish! In an instant, Crocodile took a step, his whole body became elemental, and he slid on the ground like a ghost. In the desert, the maneuverability of the sand fruit person has reached an astonishing level. In the blink of an eye, the sharp golden hook was already approaching Rowan. The latter waved his scepter horizontally and faced the golden hook. Click! The domineering collision of metal and armed color burst out a few sparks. Well! Crocodile groaned, and the soreness and tingling came to his arm again. Sure enough! This old monster 800 years ago, its physical skills are absolutely no less than the first T-line masters in the sea today. Therefore, there is no shortcut, and we can only do our best to defeat him. At the same time, a violent sandstorm was gathering in the palm of Crocodile's right hand. That was his most powerful sandstorm attack heavyweights around. Boom! Under the almost zero-distance release, Shaylin is no longer a whirring sandstorm, but more like a cannonball made of gravel. A bang! The violent impact engulfed Rowan and Crocodile. Crocodile, who had been prepared for a long time, immediately elementalized his body, and at the same time changed his arm into a sharp sand blade, and slammed it towards Rowan's position. This is his real killer move. Desert Greatsword. Swish! The gravel sank into the ground, and the huge sharp blade rose from the ground and stabbed out diagonally. Boom! There was another deafening explosion, and the yellow sand scattered all over the sky, blocking Crocodile's sight. He was panting heavily, and multiple elementalizations were extremely exhausting, but the power of his moves was indeed enormous. Old monster, how is it? This is how I use my fruit power. Seeing the domineering spread, Crocodile tried to capture Rowan's movements. However, a scene that he never expected appeared. He sensed a wall. The gravel slowly fell, and the true body of the wall was revealed in front of Crocodile's eyes. The 4 gravel guards held shields, blocking the explosion of the heavy Shaylin. It was a wall made up of pitch-black shields, the Forbidden Army. Rowan was behind them, his scepter on the ground. Swish! The 4 gravel guards seemed to have received an order, their shields turned into spears, and they turned from defensive to offensive. Then, charge forward! Swish! The 4 imperial guards rushed forward in neat steps, heading straight for Crocodile. The speed is so fast that the latter has no time to defend. Facing those sharp spears wrapped in armed domineering, Crocodile was forced to elementalize his body and avoid the deadly point of the spear. But when he looked up again, his expression suddenly stiffened. He saw that one gravel soldier after another stood up from behind Rowan. There are thousands of people. These gravel soldiers are not armed and domineering, but each holds a long spear and is ready to throw it. Target? Of course it was Crocodile himself. Rowan waved his scepter forward and gave an order. In an instant, thousands of gravel soldiers threw their spears out. Shhhhhhhh. The spears, which are as dense as raindrops, fell from the sky and went straight to Crocodile. At this moment, Crocodile is in the air, in a state of elementalization, and there is no time to avoid it. He could only watch those long spears fall. An angry and unwilling voice roared from his throat. La nron. Boom! More than 1,000 spears fell, burst into countless gravels, and drowned Crocodile's figure. The deserted desert has regained its calm again. Only rustling footsteps could be heard. Rowan walked on the gravel, step by step, gradually unraveling the state covered by the color of his entire body. He came to a newly raised sand dune. Crocodile was lying on it. The gravel spear that fell was not wrapped in armed domineering, so he was not injured, just a little embarrassed. He stared at the sky, his face gloomy. After challenging Whitebeard's paleness, Crocodile once again felt that absolute powerlessness. Lost. And this time, because the two sides are also the Shasha fruit person, the unwillingness in his heart is even greater than before. Snapped. Crocodile hit the sand with a punch and stood up from the ground. Hey! He took a deep breath, tidied up his clothes, turned to Rowan and said, "If you win, I will leave this country, but sooner or later I will." Before he could finish speaking, Rowan suddenly interrupted Crocodile with a surprised look on his face. "Why are you leaving?" Hearing this, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Crocodile was stunned for a moment, and suddenly became confused. "Do you rest assured to let a person who has plots against your country stay? At least Crocodile himself will never let anyone who has descent from him live." But Rowan didn't think so. Alabasta is a country, not a ship. Why can't you be ambitious? Rowan smiled slightly. "No matter how ambitious you are, I will always be the Emperor of Alabasta." "Ha ha ha, I keep my previous evaluation, what an unpleasant arrogant guy." Crocodile waved his hand, turned around and said, "Forget it, I'm not interested in surrendering to others." Rowan shook his head. "You don't need to surrender, but you must witness." Calm as always, unquestionable as always, but this remark made Crocodile's pupils tremble. He turned around, was silent for a while, and asked, "What are you going to do?" Rowan held a scepter and looked up at the scorching sun in the sky. The gravel floated around, and the domineering arrogance of the overlord was revealed unconsciously. At that moment, Crocodile seemed to feel that he was in that huge empire 800 years ago. The iron armor is sonorous, and the drums of war are roaring. That mighty kingdom, which traveled through time from the gravel, briefly reappeared in the world. Crocodile, who was born in this era, has never seen such a sight. Rowan lightly pinched a grain of sand. In an instant, everything dissipated and returned to the gravel of nothingness. Rowan's voice echoed in the desert. "I will restore the glory of the Alabasta Empire." The scorching sun. Zaka, the animal-type dog fruit and jackal, handed a water bottle to their little princess. After thanking her, Weiwei gave herself a few gulps and finally felt more comfortable. Far away, in the place blocked by several dunes, there was a faint roar. Different from the storm in the desert, it is more like the explosion of a cannonball. All the king's army couldn't help but wonder. The ancestral emperor who broke Shantana with a wave of hands, and the sand crocodile joined forces. What kind of chaotic army could not deal with? Why is there such a big commotion? Only Cobra narrowed his eyes, roughly guessing what happened. After 10 minutes, the roaring sound subsided. A few minutes passed. The two figures stepped across the dunes and walked towards Cobra and the others. It's Rowan and Crocodile. When the two approached, everyone discovered something unusual. Crocodile's clothes were all dirty and stained with a lot of dust. There were also a few strands of hair that fell down on the back of the head that was usually combed, and the whole person was a little embarrassed. Although Cobra was curious, he did not take the initiative to ask, because he knew that his little girl, who had no heart, would definitely satisfy his curiosity. Sure enough, Wai Wei raised her hand and asked, "Mr. Sand Crocodile, is your opponent strong?" According to Crocodile's character, naturally he would not admit such an excuse to appear weak. He and Rowan looked at each other and decided to use an excuse to shirk. The two spoke almost simultaneously. Crocodile said, "No, it just fell." Rowan said, "No, we're going sandboarding." Two people. They looked at each other again, and then changed their mouths at the same time. Crocodile said, "Well, we're going sandboarding." Rowan said, "Yes, he fell." Why Wei? Everyone. After a few seconds of silence, Cobra coughed a few times, barely easing the awkward atmosphere. "Anyway, thanks to the ancestors and Mr. Sand Crocodile, the troubles of the chaotic army are finally lifted." Rowan nodded and smiled. "Go back to the capital, Albina, I still have a lot of things to know." But what he didn't expect was that as soon as he said this, the expressions of the people around him suddenly changed, appearing to be very tangled. Even Crocodile couldn't help but lit another cigar and took a deep breath, trying to get rid of the boredom. Rowan was a little puzzled. "What's wrong?" "That's right, Lord Ancestor." Cobra scratched his head and said bitterly, "Actually, you don't need so many people to quell the chaotic army. The reason why we came out in full force was just to seek peace." "Oh." Rowan became more curious and motioned Cobra to continue. After all, the ancestor came from 800 years ago, and Cobra was not sure whether Rowan could understand what he said next. He could only try to say, "There's a heavenly dragon man in Albina's palace now." On the way back to Albina, Cobra kept explaining to Rowan what a dragon man is. Of course Rowan knows what Tianlong people are. But he couldn't say that he was a prophet, so he could only listen and sort out useful information. It turned out that a dragon man named Good Joa Saint went out to sea from the Holy Land Mary Joa and passed through Alabasta. Because the fleet needed supplies, he planned to stay in the palace of Alabasta for a few days. After staying until the next day, Cobra and the others couldn't take it anymore. The Alabasta royal family has always loved the people like sons, and they all get along with the palace servants as friends. However, the Tianlong people were particularly arrogant and domineering, and the servants beat and scolded when their service was slightly unsatisfactory. Fortunately, the Nefertari family has a special status, and Cobra and others tried their best to discourage it, which made the Good Joya Saint restrained a little, but it was still annoying. Everyone couldn't take it anymore, so they left the Kingdom Guard Captain Akalam to preside over the overall situation, and they slipped away under the pretext of going out to pacify the chaos. Anyway, the Tianlong people can't bear the hot weather in the desert, so there is no need to worry that he will go out and threaten the safety of the civilians. As long as you stay outside for a day or two, Saint Goodjoya feels bored and naturally leaves. As for Crocodile, he has no interest in conflicting with the Draconians. But all this was disrupted by the suddenly resurrected Ryan Rowan. Rowan understood the cause and effect of the incident, and did not change his original plan. He still planned to lead everyone back to Albina immediately. Seeing this, Crocodile on the side was a little disdainful. He, it seems that you still don't understand the virtues of those guys 800 years later." Rowan smiled helplessly, and suddenly said, "I thought you would leave." Crocodile took a sip of the cigar and said with a sinister smile, Pluto is near, I don't want to start from scratch, and I can also use your ego. Luo Wen was stunned. Is it really good for you to be so straightforward? Crocodile raised his eyebrows and smiled, you don't care anyway, don't you? Hearing this, Rowan suddenly burst out laughing. Okay, welcome to Alabasta. The capital, Albina. Royal Palace. Those who stayed here were the curly-haired captain of the Kingdom Guard, Akalam, and his wife, Tiragatham, who had a special relationship. The two have served the Nefertari family for many years, but now they are in big trouble. Inside the restaurant, Cobra and the others still underestimated the arrogance of Saint Goodjoy. Even though Akalam and Tirago treated each other frankly, Goodjoy found a chance to attack. At this moment, this Tianlong man with a fat body and a beard in a bubble suit was sitting at the dining table and swept the food on the table to the ground. Whoops! It's mad at me, it's mad at me. Saint Goodjoy waved his arms. The old man wants to try your country's food, but you let the old man eat this garbage, are you trying to rebel? Hearing the words, the logistics leader Bandiragotan couldn't help but retorted, Sir, these dishes are the characteristics of Alabasta. As soon as his wife's words came out, Akalam felt that it was not good. The wife who has been in the kitchen all the year round does not know, you reading www. What a sin it is for yuganshu.com to refute the Tianlong people. Sure enough, Saint Goodjoy's face darkened instantly. He beckoned, and the Tianlong guard beside him immediately handed him a musket. The gun was pointed at Diragadin. It's an honor for you, Alabasta, to come to your country, this old man. Goodjoy's face turned purple with anger. Is this how you treat your distinguished guests in Alabasta? How dare you refute me, refute your distinguished guests? He opened his mouth wide and roared, Death! 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 Boom! Under Akalam's panicked eyes, Saint Goodjoy pulled the trigger. The lead shot came out of the gun. Although Akalam was the captain of the Kingdom Guard, he was just an ordinary person, and he couldn't prevent such a close-range shooting. But he still subconsciously stopped in front of his wife. He hugged his wife and closed his eyes tightly. After a few breaths, the expected severe pain did not come. Akalam opened his eyes, only to find that the wife in front of him was staring wide-eyed, looking behind him. Akalam also turned to look. I saw a tall man wearing a golden-yellow armor, lined with purple ribbons, and an eagle-shaped helmet, standing there. The thumb and index finger of his left hand pinched the small but deadly lead bullet. A click sound. The lead bullet was crushed by the man. Rowan raised his eyes, and his eyes under the helmet looked at the plump Tianlong man. He shook his head. You are a guest, but you are not honorable. Albina, the royal palace, in the restaurant. A tall man suddenly appeared, holding a scepter in one hand and holding the lead bullet within the other hand. Gently squeeze. Click. The lead bullet shattered into several small pieces, and then turned into countless powders, floating in the air. This scene made everyone stunned. But to say the most shocking is the crocodile who was secretly hiding in the dark and didn't want to be exposed to the heavenly dragons. As the current Shasha fruit person, he is very aware of what the other party did just now. That is one of the abilities that crocodile himself developed, erosion. In an instant, he can absorb the moisture of the creature or object he touches and gradually spread it around, even the stones will be powdered, and everything around will become a dry and cracked dead place. This should have been Crocodile's unique ability. In the previous battle, Crocodile observed deliberately, and he found that Rowan developed the rustling fruit ability in a completely different direction from him. Rowan has never shown a move similar to erosion. But now, he turned the lead bullet in his hand into sand. Is it supposed to be? Or, just learned? Rowan's next muttering gave Crocodile an answer. It's a very novel move, but it's not interesting. I just learned it. Crocodile confirmed his thoughts in an instant. Because of this, his heart was even more shocked. To be able to initially master a brand new move in such a short period of time. How far did this man in front of him develop the shasha fruit 800 years ago? Never mind. Crocodile was never a person who was easily influenced by others. Now there are things that interest him even more. On the road just now, Crocodile probably learned about Ryan Rowan's life. Therefore, the scene in front of him is more interesting when it falls in the eyes of Crocodile. One is a world aristocrat, the descendants of 20 kings who once established the world government, the Tianlong people. The other is the emperor himself, Ryan Rowan, who almost participated in the establishment of the world government 800 years ago. If such two sides fight, it will be lively. Not to mention, Crocodile hid in the dark, and turned his eyes to the back of the dragon man. There were several men in suits and leather shoes standing, barehanded and dressed differently from ordinary guards. Those people are probably the fighters who are proficient in the 6th naval style among the guards, right? They are absolutely loyal to the Tianlong people. Facing the sudden appearance of unknown masters, those people will never sit still. The next second, swish. The figures of the two suit fighters disappeared. The so-called 6 naval forms are 6 moves developed by elites in the Navy to exercise beyond the limits of the human body. At this moment, what those fighters are using is one of the 6 styles, shaved. He stepped on the ground dozens of times in an instant, and achieved ultra-high-speed movement through the reaction force, which seemed to disappear out of thin air in the eyes of the enemy. Moment. 2 figures flew behind Rowan. As the guardians of the celestial dragons, their primary purpose is to eliminate all unsettling factors that may threaten their masters. One aimed at Rowan's neck, and the other aimed at Rowan's waist. All are fatal. Immediately, he turned around and kicked. It is also one of the 6 styles. The ultra-high-speed kicking kicks up the wind, creating a terrifying power that is close to slashing. 6 poses, Lanjiao. Swish. 2 wind blades, one left and one right, hit Rowan at the same time. The latter's body was cut into 3 sections in an instant, but the scene that was expected did not appear. At the incision, golden sand is slowly surging. A natural ability person? The 2 combatants looked at each other and immediately made up their minds. They stretched out their forefingers, with a dark and domineering color attached to them. The strength of the whole body gathered in it, the fingers hardened, and they stabbed out between the electric light and flint. Its power surpasses that of bullets, enough to penetrate the human body. It is one of the 6 types point to the gun. In the end, it is the personal bodyguard of the Tianlong people, with 3 moves and 6 styles in a row, and his movements are smooth, without the slightest hesitation. Armament is domineering, allowing ordinary people to touch the entity of natural ability. And the domineering finger gun wrapped in armed color is more than enough to cause the opponent to die. Boom! 2 black fingers poked at Rowan's back. At this moment, Luo Wen's elementalized body finally returned to its original state. He suddenly clenched the scepter in his hand, then slammed it back and shouted, "Irregular!" Swish! The speed of Rowan's actions far exceeded everyone's expectations. Before those touched Rowan's body, he had already turned around. The scepter shaped like a spear swung horizontally, first hitting one person, and then taking that person and hitting the second person. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the 2 combatants were swept out by the scepter, smashed into the distant wall, and were buried in the rubble. Everyone looked at Rowan again and found that he had turned around, as if nothing had happened. So strong! The guards couldn't help but widen their eyes. With just one blow, he defeated 2 combatants who were proficient in 6 forms, and the opponent didn't even have time to use the iron block for defense. Crocodile, who was observing secretly, even confirmed his previous guess. Ryan Rowan is by no means a weak commander who is not good at melee combat. Full of armament, domineering coverage, surprising speed, strength enough to numb his arms, neat movements honed from the battlefield. Coupled with that extremely high level of fruit ability development, Ryan Rao in his single combat ability is bottomless. How on earth did I revive an old monster of this level? Induction between those who have the ability to rust fruit? Crocodile was puzzled. Then, he hid himself even deeper, trying not to be noticed. Because Cobra and others came. The king did not let Vivi step into the restaurant, but led Bell and Gaka in. As soon as he entered the door, Cobra felt the tense atmosphere in the restaurant, and a drop of cold sweat fell on his forehead. But when he saw Akalam, who was hugging his wife, he immediately guessed what happened. Cobra was relieved immediately. If you were there, you might not be able to stop it, right? Even if the price of blocking is the so-called offending the Tianlong people. Seeing that his bodyguard was knocked down, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com got joyous and suddenly turned purple with anger, and cursed loudly, "Rebel!" Rowan did not speak, but continued to move forward. The ordinary guards around, seeing that the combatants who were proficient in the 6 styles were easily defeated, had to bite the bullet and go forward to stop them. After all, if you block it, you won't necessarily die. If you don't block it, you will definitely be executed. Tremblingly, they raised their muskets and pulled the trigger. Boom! 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 The lead bullet hit Rowan and immediately passed through the elemental body. Rowan waved his scepter horizontally and swept aside the group of guards who had no intention of fighting, while he stood in front of Saint Goodjoya. In a hurry, Goodjoya raised the musket in his hand, pulled the trigger one after another, and cursed, "You dare to resist the Tianlong people? You dare to resist me?" Rowan raised his scepter high. He didn't answer, but repeated Saint Goodjoya's words, but his aura was completely different from that arrogant and domineering heavenly dragon. Naturally and logically, as if he should have said that. "You dare to resist me?" Swish! He swung the scepter down, and directly sent Goodjoya away, hitting the pile of debris in the corner. Boom! Whoa! Saint Goodjoya's plump body hit the sundries, and he fell to the ground, trembling all over, and blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. Rowan continued to walk in front of Saint Goodjoya, looking down at the Tianlong people. He said slowly, "I don't know who the 20 countries that established the world government were. But there are more than 20 countries destroyed by the Alabasta Empire." Saint Goodjoy lay on the ground. He only felt that his internal organs were overturned, and his chest seemed to be torn apart. "It hurts." Then, he vaguely saw Rowan who was looking down at him, and also heard what the other party said. Alabasta Empire? He has never heard of any country on this sea that dares to call itself an empire. There are not many Tianlong people who understand politics, but Goodjoy likes to read books in his spare time, so he is even more shocked. Empire and kingdom, the difference between the word, the meaning behind it is completely different. Kingdom, this sea is everywhere. Any island, as long as there are enough people living on it and willing to join the world government and pay taxes to the world government, can establish a recognized kingdom. As for empire, these two words often mean independence. Independent of whom? Independent of the world government. This is a situation that the world government will never allow. Because of this, Saint Goodjoy couldn't help but widen his eyes. Is this man in front of him trying to lead the country of Alabasta to rebel? No, no, he has already beaten me and the Tianlong people. He must be rebelling. I want to live, I don't want to die. While Saint Goodjoy was desperately thinking about how to survive. On the side, a guard secretly took out a small phone bug from his arms, intending to press the button on it. The attack of the Tianlong people is definitely a major event that is enough to shock the world. Its influence is so great that the highest combat power of the Navy headquarters, the Admiral of the Navy, personally takes action. The purpose of the guards taking out this phone bug was to contact the Navy headquarters and ask them to send an admiral to come to support. But just as he was about to press the button, a few grains of sand suddenly appeared in front of him. When he looked up, a gravel soldier with a cold face was standing in front of him, holding a spear in one hand and reaching out to him in the other. She hooked her fingers. Speechless. The guard understood the meaning of the gravel soldier, and without any other superfluous thoughts, he handed over the phone bug that was about to contact the Navy. The phone bug fell into the hands of the gravel soldier, the receiver got into the sand, and the line inside was completely twisted, losing the function of communication. The gravel soldier put the phone bug aside, then tilted his head at the guard. The guard understood. He immediately fell on the ground, his head tilted, and he fainted. Shoo! The gravel soldier dissipated immediately, turned into a puddle of yellow sand, and returned to Rowan's body. Seeing this situation, Saint Goodjoya became even more flustered. Without the support of the admiral, he was in a desperate situation at this moment. After all, even if the world government will severely punish the criminal who killed the Tianlong people, if he dies, there will be nothing left. He trembled and stepped back again and again. You, don't come here. Who are you? Rowan lowered his gaze, a little too lazy to take another look at Saint Goodjoya's fat and ugly body. I'm Ryan Rowan. He said slowly, remember this name, and then, get out of my country. Saint Goodjoya reacted immediately, as if he had caught a life-saving straw. He let me go? What? I knew that there could be no lunatic who dared to kill Tianlong people in this world. When I return to the Holy Land Mary Joa, I will let the Navy come over to capture you group of rebels and turn you all into slaves. Saint Goodjoya thought so in his heart, but he said with a smile, I'll leave immediately. With the help of several guards, Saint Goodjoya escaped from the Alabasta Palace by rolling and crawling despite the scorching sunlight outside. The riots seemed to be over. But both Cobra and Crocodile felt that the trouble had just begun. It is impossible for Tianlong people to give up. What Rowan will face is one of the biggest troubles in this sea. Even with the protection of the royal family, the Nefertari family, it would be difficult to quell the anger of the dragon people. Cobra rubbed his brows and instructed his subordinates, in short, let the peers pay attention to the movement at sea first, and prepare a boat for the ancestors, just in case. He felt that the ancestor of Alabasta still underestimated the level of trouble of the Tianlong people. Also, how could people from 800 years ago understand today's dragon people? Letting Rowan leave was the last resort, but it was also the last resort. Hearing the words, Crocodile appeared from the corner and teased Rowan, old man 800 years ago, welcome to the sea, welcome to join the ranks of wanted criminals. To his surprise, Rowan seemed to be more concerned about another point. Hey, I was very young when I was buried. Then, Rowan grinned and asked Cobra. What's for dinner? Alabasta is a superpower with a total land area of 1 million square kilometers. Even with animals, it would take about a day to get to the nearest port from Albina. And now Rowan has destroyed the communication facilities of the Tianlong people, and the other party wants to call for support, at least to the nearest naval branch. This journey will take at least 2 or 3 days. Both Cobra and Crocodile felt that Rowan was judging that the time to leave was enough, and that's why they looked at ease. Because of the relationship between time and Tianlong people, the dinner was not rich, even a little simple, but Rowan ate happily. There is a nostalgic taste, which is unique to Alabasta. In the meantime, Cobra told Rowan's story to Akalam, who was also shocked. No race he has ever heard of has a lifespan record of 800 years, not to mention the appearance of the ancestor in front of him is still so young. After dinner. An ordinary room in the palace. Rowan dragged the gloomy Cobra forcibly and asked him to accompany him to lay down a few plates of the Alabasta flag. This is a long-standing board game that Rowan likes to use to pass the time. For 800 years, the rules of this military flag have not changed much. Besides the 2 people playing chess, there were 2 other people watching. One was the little Princess Weiwei, who was very worried after hearing about the conflict between the ancestors and the Tianlong people. The other person was curious about Rowan's next plan, and Crocodile, who also planned to prepare early. Weiwei moved a stool and sat beside the two adults. Crocodile was smoking a cigar, leaning against the wall quietly, looking out the window. Cobra had already let the servants leave, and then planned to let Vivi go back to the room to rest. After all, he wasn't sure whether the next conversation should be overheard by his daughter. Luo Wen picked up a chess piece, shook his head with a smile. It's okay, it's just a game of chess, both Vivi and the little crocodile can stay. Cobra smiled bitterly and said, if only playing chess was as simple as that. Luo Wen stared at it, slightly surprised. Are you a genius? This kind of military flag is very difficult. I learned it for a long time back then. Master Ancestor, please stop joking. Cobra shook his head helplessly. You know what I'm talking about. What? Tianlong people. Rowan still smiled, looking very relaxed. Cobra dropped a chess piece and frowned. Master Ancestor, I must remind you again that the status of the Tianlong people in this era may be far beyond your imagination. Of course I know. Rowan nodded. He looked up at Cobra and said slowly, so, I said the name Rowan to him, and he will bring this name back to the Holy Land. Mary Joa. Can. Cobra still wanted to speak. But Rowan picked up a chess piece and shook it, interrupting Cobra. He smiled and said, the name Rowan, the meaning it represents, is also far beyond your imagination. A chess piece fell, and the balance of victory and defeat on the chessboard tilted instantly. You lost, let's play again. Rowan rearranged his pieces, then rubbed his shoulders, took off his eagle-shaped helmet, and put it aside. Everyone finally had the opportunity to observe Rowan's true face in a relatively stable environment. It was indeed a face that was exactly the same as in the records. A firm and angular face, a peaceful smile, and sharp eagle-like eyes. Indeed, it lives up to the almost exaggerated praise in the history books. But at this time, everyone obviously cares more about what Rowan just said. The meaning of the name Rowan is far beyond your imagination. Crocodile frowned, thoughtfully. Cobra asked directly, Lord Ancestor, what are your plans? Rowan touched his chin, dropped the first piece of the new chess game, and said with a smile, Dragon people are very troublesome things. The reason people fear them is not the dragon people themselves, but the world government behind them. Therefore, whether it is to conflict with them or kill them directly, there will be no less trouble in the future. But Cobra, I'll teach you one thing, Rowan said slowly, dead, there are only two possibilities. Either it is very useful, or it is completely useless. If that Tianlong person died here, he would be the second kind of useless person. But living people can always be somewhere between useful and useless, so there is a lot to do. As soon as these words came out, the other three people present fell into contemplation. Weiwei scratched her head. He was still young and couldn't understand Rowan's words very well. He just felt that he didn't understand much, but it seemed to make sense. Crocodile curled his lips in disdain. As a pirate, he did not fully agree with Rowan's approach. Replay the situation at that time. If Rowan is turned into crocodile, and he must save people from the muzzle of the dragon, Crocodile may choose to secretly use the gravel to fly the lead bullet, and then stab the rescued in a non-lethal location. A wound came out. Afterwards, he threw the two of them down together, creating the illusion of being killed, to appease the Tianlong people. In this way, it is the least noticeable and the most stable. But Rowan's approach was obviously a little too flamboyant, and Crocodile was more sure of his previous feelings because of this. What an unpleasantly conceited old monster. As for Cobra, after thinking for a while, he probably understood Rowan's thoughts. Lord Ancestor, you don't plan to hide your resurrection, no, rebirth, no, awakening, not right. Cobra said several adjectives one after another. Rowan waved his hand helplessly, just wake up. Cobra then continued, Master Ancestor, don't you plan to hide the news of your awakening from the world government? Rowan raised his eyebrows, why hide it? Because the current world government has changed. Cobra has participated in many world conferences, so he has a good understanding of the world government and the thoughts of each member country. The primary purpose of the world government must be to eliminate the unstable factors that may threaten the rule of the world government, rather than to accept an ancient man who has just awakened. Rowan grinned. Indeed, the world government will definitely try to do this, but if this unsettling factor cannot be eliminated, they will definitely try to calm him down. Cobra frowned slightly, puzzled. Rowan continued to explain, in the past, there were many countries that signed a permanent non-aggression pact with the Emperor of the Alabasta Empire, that is, me, either voluntarily or by force. Cobra was stunned, guessing that Rowan was trying to use a covenant to restrict the actions of the world government. However, he couldn't help but wonder in his heart, does that really work? Crocodile was even more straightforward, shook his head and smiled and said, hey, don't you think that the world government is a group of good gentlemen who abide by the covenant? Of course not. Rowan shook his head with a smile, and corrected, they are a bunch of bad gentlemen who are very good at using covenants. Pfft. Vivi was amused by Rowan's statement, and both Crocodile and Cobra seemed to have thought of something. That heavenly dragon will bring my news back to the Holy Land Mary Joa, and of course the world government will not easily accept a person who died once 800 years ago. Rowan's fingers swayed slightly, and a chess piece flipped back and forth in his palm. Therefore, they will choose to try first. The result of the temptation will determine whether the covenant is a waste of paper or will continue to take effect. After the words fell, the pupils of Cobra and Crocodile were trembling slightly. They didn't expect that in a short period of contact, Rowan could actually count on this step. Is this the legendary emperor who led an army of iron cavalry across the world 800 years ago? Cobra paused for a while, and finally said with bitterness and helplessness, Master Ancestor, when are you going to re-enthrone? As soon as these words came out, it was Rowan who was suspicious. He was a little surprised and said, what is the enthronement? Cobra thought that Rowan was testing himself, so he answered honestly, after you died in battle, the ancestor Nefertari was crowned as a king according to your arrangement, and then the empire was changed to a kingdom. Now you are resurrected. You are awake. According to the agreement, the country of Alabasta should still belong to you. Speaking of which, Cobra looked a little reluctant. He is not reluctant to take the throne, but to his people. In the end, Cobra bowed his head and asked, I hope you can treat this country kindly. But contrary to everyone's expectations, Rowan waved his hands again and again, no, no, you are the king of the kingdom. It's business as usual. Cobra was a little surprised, even Crocodile couldn't help but be curious. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Why? I can't handle the internal affairs. Rowan scratched his head and smiled helplessly, that's how it was back then. My main external affairs were Nefertari to help with domestic affairs, so I was relieved to hand over the throne to him. But Cobra wanted to say something else. Rowan understands that the king in front of him has been uneasy about the Alabasta Empire being changed into a kingdom. He was worried that the emperor of his empire would be dissatisfied with this, and then he was furious. Rowan's sun fell, and he won another game of chess. He patted Cobra on the shoulder, got up and said with a smile, what Nefertari does is just a difference in concept, there is no right or wrong. Besides, I am the emperor of the empire, not the king, and I don't want to be a king. Cobra pondered the Rowan words. After a moment of silence, he asked, Lord Ancestor, what are we going to do next? Wait. Rowan smiled and replied, wait until the world government sends someone to test it, and then let the world government take the initiative to remember the covenant. How long will it take? Luo Wen estimated that it would take at least 3 to 5 days, including the time for communication and travel. But on the second day, Cobra suddenly received a report from the port town of Yaraja. He also had the report handed over to Rowan. The content of the report was something that Rowan never expected. There are indeed outsiders who have come to Alabasta, but they are not from the world government. It was a refuge ship full of refugees, Murloc refugees.